And also thanks to everybody who's joined this webinar. We're grateful that you're here. I wanted to tell you that we really do relish every word of the reports you guys submit. More than one of us here at the Foundation read them, and the annual reports are really the primary reason we decided to sponsor another 10 colleges to join Achieving the Dream. The reports that we got from the first 6 colleges. So, of course, we wouldn't keep funding ATD if we didn't see interventions that worked, but we learned just as much from all the interventions that didn't work from those first 6 colleges. And we really appreciated learning where things struggled as well as where things went well. So really looking forward to reading your reports and encourage an honest assessment of where things are at.
Great. Thank you, Heather. So I'm going to introduce a little bit about the webinar technology to make sure that we can make the most of the technology today. But before I do that, I'd like for the other 2 presenters on the webinar to introduce themselves.
Hi folks, this is Darby Kaikinen, Policy Research Associate with the State Board.
Hi, this is Michelle Andrews, and I work with State ATD Initiative.
Great, thank you. And to make this webinar as interactive as possible, I want to take a minute just to talk about some of the webinar functionality. You'll see on the corner of your screen really the tools, specifically the control panel, that looks similar to the one that you're viewing on the slide. And if you look specifically on the very side of it, you'll see a little grab tab. If this control panel disappears at any point of time, just click on the panel, the grab tab, and you'll be able to maximize the control panel again. We can also see we have 13 attendees in this webinar, along with the 4 presenters. And I wanted to take a minute to show you specifically the questions section of the control panel. If at any time throughout the webinar you have a question, you can type it into this questions bar. We will, for the most part, hold questions until the very end, but we'll be monitoring this questions bar throughout. So feel free to type a question to us or chat to us if something's not clear, if our voices get too low, anything. The last thing that you can do is you can raise your hand. So let's see if everyone who's attending this webinar could raise their hand now, just to see how that's working. I see most of you have found the raise your hand function here. Great. That's another way to show that you have a question. Excellent. Moving along. So really, what is the annual reflection? Heather talked about the usefulness of the annual reflection as she introduced the webinar. And it really provides an opportunity for you to consider your institution's Achieving the Dream work over the past year and to plan for the coming year. This reflection is going to be reviewed by Achieving the Dream and your coaching team, as well as College Spark, and you will receive feedback from Achieving the Dream on your annual reflection in late summer 2013. All Achieving the Dream colleges are required to submit an annual reflection. Brief overview of the agenda. So we'll spend the first portion of today's webinar talking about the annual reflection components. And the second portion of the webinar, which is particularly important, will be focused on your questions and feedback. We thank you for folks, as you registered, who shared any preview questions that you had, and we will make sure to respond to those throughout today's webinar. We will be recording this webinar, or we are indeed recording this webinar, and we'll be able to send you a link to the webinar once we've posted it on a website. So now I'm going to take a moment to walk you through the components of the annual reflection and the timeline for the annual reflection. And so specifically, the Principals Assessment Survey is the first portion of the annual reflection that you should be thinking about right now. If you're using the online survey, then responses are due by April 18th. The annual reflections narrative, you've received a customized template via email. And please raise your hand if you've received this customized template. I want to make sure that everyone has received this customized template. Okay, so I see that almost everyone has received the template, and we can make sure to send another copy of the template out after today's webinar. The annual reflection narrative with the specific customized template is due May 15th. And then the intervention showcase template or update is also due on May 15th. So now I'm going to take a minute to talk specifically about the Principals Assessment Survey. And my aim is to show you how to access the survey via the website. Try one more time. Might take a second to load. So it seems like it's taking a minute for that to load, and so what we'll do is we'll just stick to the PowerPoint. But there are, in fact, two options for completing the Principals Assessment Survey. And the first, so overall, the Principals Assessment Survey is something that should be administered to a number of stakeholders college-wide. And we want to make sure that your college really has an inclusive representation completing this Principals Assessment. What's not an inclusive representation is just one or two people completing this assessment. There are two options, though, to make completing the Principals Assessment Survey fit your college's needs. The first is that you can administer the survey online, and so you can send a link of for the survey to a number of people who can then respond to the survey. If you choose this option, ask for your colleagues to complete the survey by April 18th, and Achieving the Dream will be able to aggregate survey responses for you. We'll send you the results specifically to the core team leader, and these can be used when completing the annual reflection. So I just talked about that, option one. The second option really is that you can download the survey from the Annual Reflection website and use it to structure a group reflection and to complete the survey. If you choose the specific option, downloading the survey and using it to structure a group reflection, you will not need to submit the survey to Achieving the Dream, but of course you will need to use it when you're completing the Annual Reflection narrative. Next, I want to focus on the Annual Reflection narrative. As I mentioned, your college has received a customized template for completing the Annual Reflection narrative. A few words before we get into the document. First, you'll want to reflect on activities that your college has undertaken between May 2012 and April 2013. And once you've completed the Annual Reflection narrative, you'll be able to upload it using a link that you'll receive via email. Specifically, the core team leader at your college will be able to upload this document. So what I'll do now is I'll actually pull up the Annual Reflection narrative so we can talk our way through the question. So I'll scroll through the instructions. Note that your college's name is here, that in the 9 colleges that must submit this version of the form. So starting with the first question, contributors to the Annual Reflection, make sure you can add specific names into these 2 fields as well as people's titles. And you can certainly add more rows to this table as necessary. Question 2 is the progress statement. And really, the focus of this question, to which the response should be a 1-page narrative, is in what ways is your reform work transforming the way that students experience college? The third question is another narrative question, and specifically, it's a question in which you should describe your institution's context. And so for this question, please consider both the positive and negative factors affecting the student success efforts at your institution and provide a summary of the impact these factors have had on your college's progress in the past year. The next question is specifically related to the principal's assessment. So again, your college has 2 ways to complete the principal's assessment. So one, choosing to complete the version of the survey that Achieving the Dream has provided for you to complete online, and Achieving the Dream will aggregate the responses. 2, completing a paper version of the survey. And I wanted to let you know that certainly your college can customize this. One of the questions that we have is, if we do our own survey through SurveyMonkey, will we still need to submit it by April 18th, or is it for us to discuss internally and use with the narrative? And so, Lori, the answer there is, if you do your own survey of the principal's assessment, specifically the principal's assessment, you do not need to submit it to Achieving the Dream by April 18th, but instead you'll simply use it to complete your Annual Reflection response to this question number 4. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Oh, I see another question about the Principals Assessment Survey. And the question is, should all respondents to the Principal Survey be listed as contributors to the annual reflection? The answer is you don't need to list all respondents to the Principals Assessment Survey as contributors to your annual reflection survey, especially if you include an extraordinarily broad representation of your college. You can also choose to do so, depending on who's involved in the conversation. And specifically, yes? So specifically for this principals assessment question, what you'll do is you're going to provide a summary of your institution's responses regarding the principals assessment survey, and make sure to include a recognition of the achievements and challenges your college has experienced, particularly as you have worked over the past year, as well as a description of your future plans regarding each of the 5 Achieving the Dream principles. Moving along, specifically for question 5, I'm going to pass the microphone to Darby, who is going to specifically talk about this question, which has been customized so that you may report on the Student Achievement Initiative Momentum Point data. So Darby, take it away, question 5.
Thanks, Meredith. Okay, so question 5 is really focused on getting a sense of the institutional level data, student achievement data. This is all information that can be pulled from what was sort of named the ATD evaluation tool. This is the pivot table Excel spreadsheet tool that we've been using over the last year or so in different workshops, and can be found on the State Board website. The link is included there in your document. So everything that you need in order to answer this question can be found within this tool. Just a brief description about what this is this is fall cohort based, and again, institutional level. It's not at this point getting specific into intervention level, but for the whole entering fall cohort of students. Each of these measures that you go through, A through F, it looks like, you can find within here. So the focused cohort year that you want to start looking at is fall 2011. And as the instructions say, you also want to take a look at the fall 2010 data and then go through the 1 to 2 paragraph summary for each of these measures that describe the differences between anything that you've observed and providing some analysis there. So as written out, the measures that you're going to be looking at is first year college level points per student. That can be found on the first year tab. There's multiple tabs. The percent of students earning their quant point within 2 years is found on the second year tab. And as you'll notice, there's in parentheses, begin reporting 2014. This is because the most recent information that we have in there is the 11-12 data, and so you wouldn't have anything in there yet for that fall 2011 cohort. So this is not something you need to report on for this particular go-round. The highest momentum as of the end of 1 year, you should have that in there in your first year tab. Same thing, highest momentum as the end of 2 years, that'll be in your second year tab, begin reporting in 2014. In the first year tab is where you can find the fall to winter, the fall to spring information. The fall to fall retention will not be available for the fall 2011 group because that's technically a second year measure. So you'll notice in the second year tab that doesn't exist for fall 2011. You can reproduce that locally. I've talked to at least one other college about doing that, and if you need help with that, please let me know, and I can steer you in the right direction to do that. And then the completion of certificates and degrees is found on the 4th year tab. And then the last item there is to go ahead and describe any achievement gaps that you find in each of these measures. Specifically, if you look back at the first paragraph, it says these data need to be disaggregated by gender, race, ethnicity, and Pell status. So these are the focus groups for looking at those achievement gaps.
Thanks, Darby. And specifically, one of the attendees commented on some redundancy between the 2nd and 3rd paragraphs here. So specifically, there is some redundancy, and we apologize for the confusion, specifically about explaining how the institution is addressing achievement gaps. So you'll need to make sure to respond to that question, but we do apologize for the redundancy. Moving along to the 6th section here, or 6th question. This is an inventory, really, of student success or completion efforts at your institution, and I just want to show that you can click any of these boxes. So let's see, click any of these boxes and check it, which is a handy feature. Section 7, is there any additional information that you would like to share with Achieving the Dream in this reflection? Perhaps your institution has been awarded a specific grant, or perhaps your institution is part of a TACT consortium, or perhaps there will be a leadership change that didn't fit into any of the other questions. This is a chance to share that with Achieving the Dream. Next, I'd like to pass the microphone to Heather to talk specifically about section and question 8.
All right, so most of question 8 are questions that had been on the report previously. So these are the questions the senior college answered, and we chose to keep asking Washington colleges these questions. 8A is a new one, so that's just asking you to select which student achievement initiative momentum point each particular intervention is specifically designed to affect. We read in your implementation plans, most of you picked at least one. Sometimes you picked all of them or a couple of them in your evaluation plan. So you can select more than one here, but we want to know specifically which momentum point is the intervention designed to affect. 8B, the short-term or yearly student goals and outcomes related to this intervention. Ultimately, we are interested in seeing which interventions propel students furthest, but along the way, we want to know what kind of impact interventions are having on students in the short term. So again, for the most of you, you just look back on your implementation plan and see what your short-term goals were for this intervention. Things like GPA or course completion, sometimes fall to spring or fall to winter, retention, transition from dev to credit bearing, those kinds of things. So the short-term measure that you believe that this intervention will affect. 8C, progress on these goals and outcomes during the past year. We understand that what you provide in this section is probably going to be more limited this year than it will be in future years. So if you have implemented an intervention in the fall and you know what happened to those students in terms of, again, course completions or grade point average, those kinds of things, we'd love to hear about anything you know about the progress those students are making in terms of the area of this intervention. You can talk about that here for what you know so far this year. Next year, at this point, we'll ask you to reflect on what you learned this year that you learned after the report was submitted, as well as everything you've learned to date in the 2013 and 14 year. But again, just acknowledging that this section might be somewhat limited for folks, especially if your interventions were just implemented in the past term. Let's see. Number 8D, any changes that will be made to the design, evaluation, or outcome goal for this intervention. This, again, is just an opportunity to look back in your implementation plan, look at what you had put in there for the way you were going to implement this intervention, how you're going to evaluate it, and the impact you thought it would have. If you think any changes need to be made to that plan, then you would just describe them here. And there was several colleges had interventions that were described as still being in the planning phase during this current year. So if you've worked out the details of those and you know now exactly more of the nuts and bolts of how that intervention is going to be implemented or how it's going to be evaluated, we'd want you to put that in here, and that's kind of our way of updating your implementation plan. Section 8E, what percentage of your college's enrollment is participating in this intervention, excluding non-credit continuing education students? Here we just really want to get a sense of the scope of this intervention on your campus. Campus population varies so widely among you all. We don't really know, what the numbers you give, if that's almost all of your students, just a small handful, or somewhere in between. So we're going to ask you to tell us what the scope is of each intervention. So unless there's any questions about those parts, I'll turn it over to Darby to talk about the table here, question 8F.
It doesn't appear that there are any specific questions about this section yet.
Okay.
So let's pass it to Darby to talk about F, 8F.
Thank you. Okay. So 8F is really about now getting into the lowest level of detail of linking student achievement data to your interventions. So I've talked with a couple of colleges. One of them is actually very helpful with their questions because it helped point out a couple of things that I wanted to make sure to tell everyone about in this webinar. First of all, just for the benefit of those who don't work directly with student achievement data, I wanted to explain what this highest momentum field is. What this is really a summary field. The momentum points are set on a research-driven continuum with the idea that basic skills is the first step, ready becomes next after that, and then all the way up to the tipping point, in that as students complete each of those momentum points, they're more likely to continue on to the end. So that's what this highest momentum summary field is all about, is taking a look at the students' momentum points within the year and how far along that research-driven continuum did they get. So one thing that can be confusing about this is, for example, you'll see that the quantitative point falls after the first 30 college credits. So a student may have come in and taken just their math course and haven't hit 15 or 30 credits yet, but you'll see them appear in the quantitative point section as that's their highest momentum, because this isn't a what did they physically do or according to their transcript do, but according to our framework, how far did they get? And so there is a field within the Student Achievement Database that captures this. What one of the colleges pointed out to me is as they were looking at their 11-12 data, they weren't finding the highest momentum earned field that I had indicated in this paragraph here. And so I looked into that, and actually what it was is we have transitioned one of the old fields into that to make it more user-friendly for this purpose. And so in all of the colleges database, and we have a cumulative updated continuously database here at the state board, but for the colleges that we snapshot each year and send out, the field that is in there that represents this is actually called Momentum Summary Indicator. So I'll be making a lookup table and working with you to be able to use that information a little more easily. So you might find that as you're starting to look at this, you might not find that highest momentum earned field, and that would be why. So another thing to make sure to point out is the timing of all of the data. So at this point in the table, you'll see it asks for baseline information and then students who participated in the intervention in each of the subsequent 3 years. So at this point, really, the only full year's worth of data that you would have is baseline data. We're still in the middle of 2012-13. Student achievement is an annual database. It won't be completed until pretty much October. So at this point, this is the baseline data is what you'll be generating. What you want to look for baseline data, in the example it says please define, in example, all Dev Math students, specific to your intervention. So you're going to fill out one of these tables for each of your interventions. Whatever the target population is that you're focusing on, that's going to be your baseline data. So again, an example, if it's a intervention that's focused on pre-college math, then you would pull the highest momentum for all of the pre-college math students from the year 11-12. Same thing for if it was a specific course that you're looking at, you'd pull all students from that course. I think that was about it as far as my information on this one, but again, please let me know if you have questions, and we can certainly work directly with you on the database side to get this part filled out.
Wonderful. And Darby, how should folks get in touch with you if they have questions on the database side?
Either email or call is fine.
Okay, great. And just to double highlight that Darby's contact information is on the annual reflection narrative template. So next we're going to talk specifically about direct service interventions, and Heather is specifically going to cover this question, section number 9.
All right, so question number 8 asks for specific information on each intervention, whereas question 9 is just kind of in general, some feedback from you just about things in general. So that first question, how do these interventions address achievement gaps and equity concerns on your campus? During the planning year and in your intervention plans, you all talked about how you thought that you had designed these interventions specifically to address inequities and achievement gaps. So we just want to hear about, is that happening? Is your thinking changing about how you address those gaps? For the senior colleges, we know that a lot changed for them from the first year to the second and third year in terms of what they really thought was going to work. So we just want to hear about those kinds of things in this section. 9B, pretty self-explanatory. Have you used any of the data that you've gotten so far to make changes to what you're doing in your interventions? For example, if you didn't get the results you thought you were going to get, what did you do to your intervention to change to try to get the results you wanted? 9C, what evaluation obstacles have you faced? Examples here could be things like IR capacity, acceptance, or have things changed in terms of faculty and staff acceptance or resistance to the data that you're providing, those kinds of things. Are there things about your evaluation plans in general that maybe you thought they were going to answer the questions you wanted, but upon looking at the data, it just didn't get you the information you needed? 9D, if any of the interventions above have been scaled up, please describe how. In general, most of the colleges had pretty good, pretty big interventions in these plans. Some of them were going to hit a lot of students right off the bat. So if they've been scaled up to the extent that they're going to be scaled up, we'd love to hear about that here. And if you have created plans to scale up an intervention, we'd also like to hear about that here. And then, let's see, 9E, briefly describe any new interventions you plan to implement. Again, we use this report to really update your implementation plan. If there's enough changes, we'll do an amendment to your grant agreement describing the way your implementation plan has changed. So if you've added any new interventions or discontinuing any of your interventions, we want to hear about that here.
Great, thank you. And then the final question here, the annual financial report. Heather, there were a couple things that you wanted to say about the financial report.
Right, so when you fill out the financial report, we don't have a really firm line where we say this is the beginning of the grant year and this is the end of the grant year, but we do want to know what are you going to have spent during the 2012 to 2013 year, what's going to be left in terms of carryover, and how do you want to allocate that funding during the 13-14 year and the 14-15 year. So if you look at the financial report form, it will give you an opportunity to describe what happens in all of the grant years. So just please give us your best thinking on where you'd like that money to go. Anytime there's going to be a change or a carryover amount that's going to be more than $10,000 or affect any line item by more than 10%, we need to do a grant amendment. Not a problem to do that. It's just a process we have to go through. So that's one thing that would have to happen before your next grant disbursement.
Great, thank you. Heather, we do have a question that I'd like to address regarding number 9, the direct service interventions. And the question here is, should colleges address any interventions they have ceased?
Can you say that again, Meredith?
Should the colleges address any interventions they have ceased or discontinued?
Yes, yes. So, you know, we'd still like them to fill out question 8 for that particular intervention because we'd like to see what kind of data maybe prompted them to discontinue the intervention. If an intervention just never got off the ground and you decided to go in a different direction, you wouldn't need to fill out the whole section 8 on it necessarily. You could just tell us in 9 that intervention we were doing isn't going to happen. So some colleges had more than a dozen interventions and some colleges had 2. So if you're one of the colleges that had a dozen and you stopped doing one, you know, not a big deal. If you had 2 and you stopped and you discontinued one, we'd want to see a replacement for that.
Great, thanks, Heather. And Heather, I'll read a question too, specifically about the annual financial report. So, the question is, are the colleges reporting on their fiscal year, July 1st to June 30th, or what we understand to be the College Spark year, May 1 to April 30th?
You know, it really is up to the college. You can do either way. But if you do the July through June, you're making some guesses about what's going to happen in May and June, but it's fine to do that. You can just provide updates next year. So it's fine to use your college's fiscal year if you prefer.
Okay, great. Thank you, Heather. Okay.
Hey, Meredith. I'm just seeing a question. I don't know where I'm seeing it, but I see a question on 8E. I just want to make sure it was answered.
Okay, and so the question on 8E, and I'll scroll up to 8E so we can all see it. 8E. And 8E is, what percentage of your college's enrollment is participating in this intervention, excluding non-credit continuing education students? And the question is, what if the intervention focuses on non-credit basic skills?
You know, that's a good question. I think we tried to wordsmith this one a few times because we do want to capture basic skill students. We were thinking not like folks who are there for, you know, rec credits or those non-credit recreational kinds of things, or you know, I'm not describing this well, but we do want to include basic skills students. So if you have an intervention that's explicitly focused on basic skills students, you might just describe what percentage of your basic skills students you're reaching.
Thank you. Okay. Excellent. So next I'm going to bring back the PowerPoint. Oops. I brought back the round version of the PowerPoint. And I'm going to briefly speak about the intervention showcase. Your colleges, one, should be receiving an email from Achieving the Dream next week, specifically with login information to the intervention showcase. And I must say we are very, very excited about the intervention showcase because it illustrates the student success interventions of colleges throughout the Achieving the Dream network. And specifically what you'll need to do is you'll need to provide an update to each of the intervention descriptions you shared with Achieving the Dream in April 2012, so those descriptions that were in your implementation proposals. And if necessary, you'll add any new interventions. You'll also have a chance to say whether any of the interventions that have been entered for your colleges are planned, if they're active, or if they've been discontinued. So I'll give you a preview of what you'll be able to log in to see. So overall, a nice thing about the intervention showcase is that you'll be able to search through a number of interventions once it's been populated. And here's an example of how you could search for any course redesign interventions that specifically focus on the content area of English. Another example of what it would look like if you're looking specifically at interventions that focus on the Achieving the Dream principle of equity. A few details about what you'll update. So moving forward, each of the intervention descriptions that will be entered or for an intervention will include the information that you see listed on the screen. It will be easy to input this information. There'll be some boxes that you'll put numbers in. There's a description field, and there are multiple drop-down boxes for which you can choose content area, show the focus of your target population. I wanted to highlight here a couple of the numbers questions that you'll want to be thinking about in advance. So you'll want to make sure to enter the number of the students in the target population who are served by the intervention in a specific reporting year. So this reporting year, the number of students in the target population total for this reporting year, and the number of all students, so not just those in the target population that are served in this specific reporting year. I also want to make sure that though there is a field that lists outcome indicators this intervention targets, you will not need to respond to that specific question. Again, you will not need to complete the outcome indicators this intervention targets question. And while this is in tiny print, it's an example of all of the different fields that you'll fill. Again, this is easy to complete. It's all online, it's all editable, and the nice thing is it saves for you, so you can just update it in coming years. Next, a few close-ups. So in the interventions descriptions field, this field has some word-like formatting functions, so you can add bullets, etc. You'll be able to, this is another close-up that has information like the start academic year, the drop-down boxes that you can complete. And once an intervention description is completed, it'll look something like this. So now I've covered the specific components of the annual reflection. So first, the principals assessment survey that can be completed online by April 18th or can be completed by a number of your colleagues at your college campus. 2, the annual reflection narrative, for which you have a customized template that we've discussed. And 3, the intervention showcase update that you'll be able to update between next week and May 15th. So here's your time. We have a couple questions that have popped up over the past few minutes, and so I'll take some time to read those now. And then I'll also want to make sure that we address all of the questions that you input before the webinar began when you were registering for the question or for the webinar. And so I'll take a minute to read through specific questions that we may not have addressed. Again, if you have additional questions, type them into the question pane. And I'm going to pull over the annual reflection narrative template because we have, let's see, I believe we have some questions about specific portions of that template. Okay, so I'm going to pull over the template for question 5. And related to question 5, the question is, and this is directed to Darby and Heather. So am I correct in understanding that there are a few measures that we will not be expected to respond to this year? So this is specifically questions 5, A through F.
I'll just say I wouldn't say that there's any measures that you're not expected to answer, but students in the, so you're talking about baseline in this one, right, Darby, this year?
So in thinking about like fall 2011 is the focus cohort for this particular one, there's a couple of those measures in which there will be no data for them.
Right.
So they can't really write a comparison. Heather, did we talk about providing data for the more baseline cohort if it was available? So at least reporting on fall 2010 for completing math within 2 years, or what?
You know, okay, so I'm thinking that, so in question 8, the table, that was going to be baseline this year, right, because that's 2 years prior to intervention. But in this one, they're comparing 2010 and 2011. So there would be a comparison, but you're right. So nobody really could, the 2010 cohort, we wouldn't know what they've done this year, so we couldn't talk about the last couple measures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're correct. That there's only going to be the front end of the spectrum that you're going to be able to talk about this year.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for responding to that question. Let's see. Another question that I see is specifically, can we include attachments to the annual reflection narrative? And so, you know, I think I'd like a little bit more information about attachments that you'd want to include, but it's likely that you would just be able to really upload this one document, so you may want to include it in question number 7, sharing. And I'm happy to talk offline about that specific question. I'm looking for additional questions that have been typed in. And I think at this point in time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on some questions that we received ahead of time. And specifically, a question is, how do the College Spark expectations differ from the Achieving the Dream implementation plan? And the implementation plan is the report that you completed last year. And the response here is that College Spark supported colleges are expected to follow their Achieving the Dream implementation plans. However, they will measure their student success progress to the student achievement momentum point. Anything else that folks want to add?
I'll just add that, you know, for most colleges, they describe student achievement initiative momentum points in their implementation plan, so I see them as very complementary.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Let's see. A question is, and we've addressed this to some extent, but I want to make sure that it's answered. A few of our interventions have just begun. How shall we handle what may only be baseline data?
I'll just say again that if it's something you implemented last fall, we'd love to hear, you know, anything you know about what happened to them at the end of the term or in the winter or spring terms. If you just implemented this past term for the first time, then right, we're not going to be able to talk much about impact, and that's okay.
Okay, great. Another question specifically about the data is, I would like to know more about what time periods to use for data reporting, annual versus quarterly, which years to use, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is specifically for question number 5. Darby, do you want to highlight that again?
Sure. Go back to. Okay, so again, the focus cohort is 2011. So you have your fall 2011. They have 1 year's worth of data in there. So for each of the first year measures, that's what you would be looking at here. And then in addition to that, you also want to look at fall 2010 as sort of your comparative cohort. This is why we've got in parentheses like on measure 2, begin reporting 2014 with % of students earning their quant point within 2 years, because you don't have 2 years worth of data yet for fall 2011. You know, there's nothing you can report on as far as making the comparisons there.
Great, thank you, Darby. Another question is, how will the Student Achievement Initiative Momentum Points impact colleges qualifying for Leader College status? And the response to that question specifically is, College Spark supported colleges will be eligible to achieve Leader College status. And Achieving the Dream is taking the Student Achievement Initiative Momentum Points under consideration to determine how these Student Achievement Initiative Momentum Points will be translated into special data templates for reporting progress for the Washington colleges. We have a question specifically about the State Board website and the ATD evaluation tool. Specifically, how do you get information for just one college?
Without having it open right now, I want to say that that's one of the drop-down boxes. It's just
near the top.
Okay, so it's a drop-down box near the top. And again, Darby's contact information is on the annual reflection narrative template, and so as you're working your way through the data and looking at that specific tool, if you have questions, it's an easy email or picking up the phone to get your question answered.
And I've got it open, so it's line 6 in
Okay.
on the first tab, yeah. Actually on all the tabs, line 6.
Okay, so line 6?
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. And so I'm scrolling through one more time to see if there are any other questions. Okay, at this point in time, I don't see any additional questions, but certainly feel free to ask questions of Achieving the Dream, your leadership coaches and your data coaches, and of Kind Darby to answer some questions about using the specific data tool as you're completing your annual reflection. So again, thanks so much for giving up time on a Friday afternoon to prepare for completing your annual reflection, and we look forward to seeing more about the great progress that you're making. So thanks again. I'll end the webinar now.
Thanks, Meredith.